And we're live. Welcome to Music Matters with Jason Tramm, and thank you so much for joining us for our unique podcast community where we explore the triumphs and challenges of the performing arts world as seen through the eyes of distinguished colleagues. Thank you so much for helping us grow. We hit 1,772 subscribers today, and every day we grow thanks to people like you who watch our content and respond to us, and we really appreciate that. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and smash that bell icon for the most up-to-date information on our upcoming guests and topics. Feel free to like and share our videos and add to our community. Here on Music Matters, we feature artists from a variety of genres, from classical to contemporary pop, rock and roll, indie singer-songwriters, and everything in between. And we're so delighted you can join us today. We have two fantastic artists, and it's going to be a fascinating conversation today. We have Miss Heather Martin Bixler, who is an acclaimed violinist and also an Irish fiddle player. She's performed all over the world and has her doctorate in music, as well as performed with many major symphonies and great concert halls. But she also recently did her undergraduate in Columbia, went back to school, and in neuroscience, and is working and studying in neuro. We're going to talk about that quite a bit, I'm sure. And we also have a friend of mine, Arman Alpyspaev, who is a violist and a very talented artist. He's played with many of the finest orchestras as well. And two fantastic string players, two fantastic people. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Why don't we introduce yourselves a little bit? Arman, why don't you go first? We've worked before, and I'm meeting Heather for the first time. I'm really exciting, and Armand has set this all in motion, so I'm so delighted you're here. So Armand, you have an accent. Where are you from originally?
Oh, I'm originally from Kazakhstan, and I was born at the time when the Soviet Union was still going strong, and I know all about communism and the beauties of authoritarian rule. But what was wonderful is that I had an opportunity to study music at actually the best school in Moscow. It was basically, I guess, a lottery, that I got lucky and I got into that very elite school, and it came with a boarding school, so I could move away from my family and study in Moscow, quite close to the walls of Kremlin.
Oh,
We were just a few blocks away.
how old were you when you started just the schooling?
Um, 10. I moved to Moscow when I was 10. So not old enough to have an independent sort of a life away from home, but we had a lot of a lot of supervision. So um, I mean, too many actually, too many people supervised us. But the end result was great. I ended up um, having long-lasting friendships with really amazing musicians, and what I have to admit that sometimes, in that um, country, they could actually spot a talent from afar, and then they actually encourage to leave the family and be under the
Now, I imagine most of the artists who went through the Moscow State Conservatory would have stayed in town, or would have stayed in Russia, or stayed in the Soviet Union. So, what brought you to the States?
um, actually, it was around the time that Soviet Union started falling apart, and what frightened me the most is the coup that happened um, when Gorbachev was on vacation. So it was a perfect quote unquote timing that um, they picked, sort of like a very small group of people that decided to turn the clock of history backwards, and there were tanks on Red Square, and they just decided to demonstrate the power. Unfortunately, of course, it was um, kind of fought back, and luckily we moved on. But I decided to move on to the West, and I had thankfully I had a visa to America that I could um, buy a ticket and fly to New York.
So, what was it like making the transition from the east to the west and coming to New York City and studying? I know you went to Juilliard, and what was it like acclimating to the musical scene over here?
Or it was really actually the transition itself was very difficult because you come from a highly regulated, regimented society that you really did not have any freedom. I mean, basically, the whole life is sort of pre-written for you. Especially if you go to an elite school, you're supposed to represent the country and on the world stage is blah blah. So and because of also very restricted information um, sources. Like I did not really have any idea how America was. So for me, it was kind of coming and learning on the spot. So the shock was severe because from a non-materialistic, supposedly, a society, you come into highly materialistic, and that was a big um, surprise. But then, of course, there are a lot of mitigating factors that you slowly learn, and why it is a better society, and basically um, the one that stimulates growth and success and knowledge, everything. Freedom is important.
What? How was the music? Was it the what was it like studying music in the States? Was it a different way of studying? Was it a different philosophy? How did you
Yeah,
take that?
absolutely. That's a great question, actually, Jason. So, to me, again, as a person from a very dictatorial society, I was used to being instructed what to do, how to do, when to do it, etc. So my impression of the style of teaching here was also very um, unexpected. It felt like nobody cared. So basically, I did not know how to read that the freedom that was given to me to create, the freedom to create, I did not recognize it because, again, lack of knowledge of what it represents, inability to recognize it, etc., etc. So but again, like slowly, I started understanding what it meant, and it's not lack of care. It's basically you're your own person. You determine what you need to do, etc., etc. So yeah, I mean, it was a really steep learning curve, but I don't regret it.
Well, thank you, Arman. It's great to meet you musically and hear your story. Heather, tell us about your story. Tell us about your music making and how you came to be where you are today.
Well, I started actually in the school system. I'm from Wisconsin, grew up there. My um, parents were, neither of them were musicians. They both are from Canada and grew up on farms in Canada. My father is a pastor, and I have two sisters. And there's a little cute story of my mother when she was a little girl, or she was young. She lived on a farm in Canada, and she would sometimes walk down to the corner. There was a church that would meet, and one time there was a violinist there, and she thought the violin was so beautiful, and she wanted to touch it and just see what it felt like. And so she crept up to the front pew, and the violin was sitting its case on the front pew, and my mother reached over and was just about to touch the violin, and the violinist turned and saw her and yelled, "Don't touch!" And my
Oh
mother
no!
never touched it, but she has three daughters who all became violinists, and so we were a trio, and we played in my a lot. I had a lot of performing experience at the church that I grew up in, which was really great. um and then I don't know, just we just continued. My mother was super strict, and no overnights. Saturday mornings were violin lessons, and it was like sacred. Our Saturday every Saturday, and um, so I couldn't stay overnight at anyone's house on a Friday night. So yeah, that like we had in the summer we had to practice. We had work to do until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and at 2 then we could go outside and do whatever, with our friends. And I was always told how mean my mother was, and I would, but anyway, it paid off. And we I ended up going to Indiana University for my undergraduate, and then Juilliard for my master's, um, and then have been in New York for ever since then. My first orchestra job was in Spain, actually in La Coruña, Spain. So we moved over there for 4 years, and
What was that like coming from Midwest and completing your training in different places in the States? What was it like working in Europe?
well, at that time, so this is 1992. So we first went to La Coruña and only stayed there for a little while, and then my husband's a jazz musician, so there was nothing for him to do in that part of Spain. So we actually moved to Barcelona soon after. And I auditioned for the orchestra in Barcelona when I was 8 months pregnant with my second son.
Wow.
So I got the job, but they had this mandatory 4-month maternity leave, so I couldn't start working yet. So I just had to wait. And then that was fine, but I started working, and it was actually hard. My Spanish was non-existent when I went over there, and so I was trying to learn it, but I think that I kind of resisted it. I was having kind of an identity crisis, like I'm American, but I'm really confused about like what. So I didn't readily accept. Also, I had just had I had a baby over there, and that was hard. I didn't understand about postpartum depression and culture shock, and those two things, and how they both were interacting with each other. So there's a lot of mental health stuff that was probably going on that nowadays there'd be answers for, but back then I didn't know how to handle it. I just knew that I was confused about a lot of things. I remember in the orchestra in Barcelona, we had our schedule was that we would have rehearsals Tuesday through Friday and concert Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday morning. And then we'd have the rest of Sunday off, and Monday off. And so I remember Mondays I would be in my apartment doing stuff. And sometimes I would walk out onto the street and realize, oh yeah, I live in a country where I don't really speak the language. And that got better, after a while, but it never was great. Like I always felt like unsure how I sounded in this language. And also because in Barcelona they speak Catalan, so they don't want to speak Spanish, Castellano with you. So there were a lot of things. Plus I was a woman, and that was a little bit difficult in this orchestra. They were pretty much that, of the mindset that you could play maybe the harp and flute if you're a woman, but everyone else, every other instrument should be played by a man. So there was a little bit of that, and
hopefully that's changed since then. We can all keep our fingers
so.
crossed.
I definitely think so. This was back a few years ago, but yeah, it was. There was 1 week when every week we had a different program, and there was 1 week where we had an American conductor, an American violin soloist, and he played Barber Concerto, and we also played Bernstein symphonic dances from West Side Story, and I practically was crying the whole week, so I was so homesick.
Aw.
But it was great. I mean, it was a great experience. It was a great first orchestra experience.
So you've done. You also in your bio that you've You've taken concertmaster positions in other orchestras, correct?
Yes, I had. I went to Mexico City for 2 summers, and I was assistant concertmaster there. I was concertmaster of an orchestra here in New Jersey for about 7 years, and that was really good. It was a small orchestra, per service orchestra, but I had the experience of doing that, and I remember it's not just the playing, to be a concertmaster. When I was in the orchestra in Mexico and I was sitting assistant concertmaster with a lot of, there was a lot of male chauvinism around there too. So it was a touchy. There was one day the conductor came to me and said, "How are you doing?" And I said, Well, it's really tough. I turn around to say something to, if the section's divided and I want to say something about the bowing, and I just get this like everyone ignores me, or I get this like it's like everyone's mad at me because I'm sitting here. And he said, "Well, I yeah Leon Speer, who was one of the concertmasters of Berlin Philharmonic, he was asked once time, what does it take to be a good concertmaster? And his answer was a thick skin. So I think that, that was one of the things I learned.
Good comments. Yep, that makes sense. So tell us about the Irish fiddling. Did you always do that, or something new, or is that something you always added to your rep?
It wasn't. I didn't always do it. No, not at all. I am Irish in my background. My few generations ago came from Ireland and Scotland to settle in these areas in southern Ontario, which is where both my mother Scottish, and my father's family is Irish, and grew up like that. And so I think it was just I was always drawn to Irish music. I didn't know what it was. I always called it Celtic music. I mean, I didn't know that there was a difference between Scottish and Breton and Irish music, and that even within Irish music, there are differences in the different counties, different stylistic performance practices. I just knew that I liked it. And so there was one time I went on a trip to Scotland, and I thought, well, I'm going to go to a session. Like, I didn't know about sessions, but I'm going to go, play. I want to go hear something. So I emailed the session. I said, I'm going to be in Edinburgh on this night, and I'm a violinist, a classical violinist. Can I play? And the guy wrote back and said, yes, you're very welcome, and we'll have some music for you to play. So that was my first experience. And so when I came back to New York, I thought, okay, I need to get a teacher. I read that you have to have a teacher. You can't teach it to yourself. So I got a teacher, and he said to me, and I thought, well, I play the violin. This is going to be easy. And he said to me, it'll take you 5 years before you can, of studying this music, before you would feel comfortable. And he was right. I probably took me more than 5 years, but it's like a language. And I was playing a gig somewhere, an Irish gig, and this pianist friend of mine who was very, very honest came to me, and he said, it's like you're playing with an accent, and you're not a native speaker yet with this music. It has just really specific rhythms, it's so specific, and it's really complicated. And the complexity is, so much of it is unrealized, like it's all in the melody line, and it's implied. So that's one of the things that makes it really difficult also. So
I had a podcast with a shakuhachi flute master. His name is James Schleifer, and James was a professional, I guess, wind player in New York City, and he had this epiphany and started playing the shakuhachi flute. It took him like 2 decades to get he became one of the world masters at that. And I think it's hysterical that we have a Caucasian shakuhachi flute master. But I just love that kind of how long it does take to master any language, right?
Yeah. So I studied it. I took a student approach. I mean, at first I was doing it just as a hobby, but then I realized how interesting it was, and I really studied it. And then when I did my doctorate, I actually wrote my dissertation on how Irish music and classical music, how Irish music influences classical music if they're taught in the same space.
So you live your studies. I love that. That's great. And just always learning. That's fantastic. So the next chapter in your life, I mean, incredible that you've studied neuroscience at Columbia University, and after all your education to go back and do something brand new, it must have been incredibly challenging. And tell us about that journey.
Chemistry, my first chemistry. So I started in January of 2017, and 17, and I thought, oh, I'll be fine. I'm pretty good at math. and I had no idea. I had forgot. I didn't remember one thing from high school, and I was with. So Columbia has this program where you're, if you've been out of high school for more than a year, you're in. They have the School of General Studies, so you're non-traditional student, but you're along with Columbia College, which is the where you just went to high school the previous year, and now you're freshman. So we were in classes with all together. So I was with these kids who were my children's age who had just taken AP chemistry, and they're really into the like you just lose your ability to do it if you're not studying all the time. So learning how to study and take an exam again, it's funny. I applied a lot of what I know about performing to taking exams. So one of the things I would do when I started realizing how hard it was to take an exam at Columbia is I would do a practice test in the room where I knew it was going to take place, and I would time myself because it had to be timed. They're all timed, and then I sometimes I'll eat 3 bananas before I have to perform because of the beta blockers in them. So I would do that for the exams, and it really helped because I would get nervous with these there and stop being able to think clearly. And so I was able to apply a lot of that, to studying, but it was.
And of course, your discipline is going to, of course, be. There's so many transferable skills. I know I meet executives all the time when I work at fundraising for the opera companies I've worked for. Whenever I go in and meet like a lot of executives, a lot of them have musical background. They're recruited because of their musical training. So those skills are so transferable.
Yeah, they are. I did have one of my classes I had to take because the undergraduate was a full undergraduate degree. I had to take all these global. I had to take everything, writing. Not just science courses, but one of my classmates asked me if I would write an op-ed about what it was like to be an experienced student, meaning older. And I remember it's like I would be sitting in calculus class and I'd be taking notes, and I look at my classmate who was 18 and she was like texting her friend, and I think, put that phone away. How are you not writing down everything this professor is saying? I had a very different attitude about school than I did back, when I was doing my first undergraduate degree. But I made it through. It was hard, but I did it.
It's an incredible accomplishment. But why neuroscience?
Well, so that is because I have a son with epilepsy, and it's been a long uphill battle for the past 12 years now. And it's been the most difficult thing of my life, I would say, to have a son. And people with healthy children are so lucky, and they don't realize it until you have a son who isn't healthy and spends a lot of time in the hospital, and is just everything is a struggle. And my his epilepsy, the firing in his brain is so constant. I don't even know what he struggles with. Wow. And for him to get through a day and be successful and like take a math test, he's in his last year of high school right now, and do okay is so much more for him, work for him than it would be for anybody who doesn't have to struggle with epilepsy. It's the most horrible. It's one of the horrible diseases because it's very misunderstood. It's not understood. There's way many questions. It's incredibly illogical. Also, the word epilepsy is a word that encompasses a lot of different deficits or disabilities with the brain, and so it's so nuanced and it's so misunderstood because you can't study a healthy brain. You can't like take someone's skull off and look at their brain. You just can't do that. So it's very hard to actually study the brain. The only way you can do it is if someone is in the hospital with the skull removed for some kind of operation or procedure.
Yeah. Wow.
Right.
Wow. So it's personally affected you to change a direction and go a totally different way. And how did the two of you, how did Arman and how did you two meet?
Well, actually, when Heather was talking about her sisters, I was about to say, oh, I have a story about one of
Please
the
jump in.
sisters.
Tagging.
Yeah, we actually lived in the same area, and I
My
mean,
younger sister.
no, I
Oh,
mean,
wait.
yeah, with Heather, but we didn't know each other. And one day I was, I think, lining up at Silver Moon Bakery on 105th Street, and I saw a blonde violinist, and she looked very similar to somebody I went to Juilliard with, and her name was Janice Martins. So she's the youngest of the three sisters. And I, you know, said hello to Heather, and I said, I think we went to school together, but for some reason you're taller. And yeah, and it was really, and it's just like, oh, I think you're thinking about my sister, and that's how we met. It was at the bakery.
I love how music connects people from everywhere. That's my favorite thing about music. Is whenever I guest conduct, or it's amazing how you make those connections, and music will take away all those boundaries, and here we are today.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
So I've had a lot of conversations with Arman over the years. He's a very deep philosophical thinker, and he called me about this idea of exploring music and the sacred, and music and the how music and the sacred intertwine. And I'm always fascinated by this.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, what triggered my well, there were several triggers. I started reading up on aesthetics of arts and music in particular, and I also recently was exploring different concepts of how society is organized. Because I've been always on the left. Like I grew up Marxist, communist. Then I came to New York. I was liberal, and then when things were changing, and a lot of us started questioning where it's all going. I felt that I needed to reassess everything, and maybe it's part of the midlife crisis also. So I wanted to learn about religion, and the conservative side views, and so, and after a few years, everything started sort of coming into one space. It's very interesting that things connect. Uh, Maybe like in quantum physics, like there is a chaos, but then there's some kind of an arranged chaos, So somehow things will fall into their supposed place, but you don't know how. And there is something to be said about accumulating knowledge for the knowledge's sake, and then uh, again, there will be a moment when you will say, "Oh, that's why I read about that."
Interesting.
And you know, also most recently, Heather got this gig with the advocacy group for musicians and who have a belief system. So to me, what it gave me a window, an opportunity to look what exactly does it mean to people with a belief system, um, and how
Did you
they.
grow up with a religion when you were a young or a child?
No, I mean, we were atheists. I mean, basically, it's basically like they're imposing everything now on the left in America. It was the same. It was the same story. You just think one way. You use those words. You live this lifestyle, and that's that. There is no pluralism. So yeah. So for me, it was an eye-opening experience, um, and Heather organized meetings where we would play music, and we will discuss um, things in the context of a belief, a religious belief. So, and in this instance, it's the Christianity. So again, when I was reading about aesthetics of music and the way we were taught, it was never mentioned to us what is signified, especially early music, Baroque music. Um, so to me, um, suddenly I started understanding that there is significance uh, to the fact that it was kind of not presented in a meaningful way. That the music that was composed with a strong belief system, that that music expressed a certain value system. So when you start thinking in those categories, it changes a lot of things.
It's
So
fascinating if you go back to the beginning of Western classical music
yeah,
comes out of monophonic Gregorian chant.
exactly.
So and the through the lineage of polyphony and then of course it's changed quite a bit over the centuries. But I just find it fascinating that back in that time when it was founded, the first the Christian church, the first 500 years was monophonic music only, and this kind of the divine order is reflected so clearly in that early stage.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's why I wanted to talk with you about the whole developmental process and how Western music developed through the centuries, and exactly what you just said, that the source was again a, a religious source, and it signified something very meaningful. And I think there was a period in probably 19th century when everything started changing. So the further we went from the origins of Western music to where we are now, and you know, and it's just like modern world, we are witnessing that everything is falling apart. And I think because we grew apart from the roots of the concept, it just stopped making sense, you
Well, I'm
know.
sure Heather can chime in here, but I'll say that I find this to be true. As also, if you look at pre-Gregorian chants, before Pope Gregory the Great organized those chant body of it, there was a way earlier existing chants that go way before that, because some of those do survive. But before that, all of that was based off of Hebrew chant melodies that goes back thousands of years. So this idea of music in the sacred, and then they have the earliest they think is musical notation from the Sumerians. I guess it was the Sumerians, and it's on cuneiform. I don't think we can make the music come alive again, but I mean, I guess those were hymns too.
Are there any records? Because Sumerian is a very fashionable topics right now with intellectuals and whoever is curious of
I'm a history fanatic, so I watch every documentary I possibly can. I'll look that up though. I think though they do have some tablets, and that the earliest surviving they think is musical notation on cuneiform.
I mean, our my musical education started with Gregorian chant. That's grout when we did studied music history. It began with that.
And it's about as much fun as watching grout dry. I'm just kidding.
It's true.
How much do all of us music majors love sitting like learning Gregorian chant? Unless the voice majors are different, but I find that those instrumental majors always it was like, oh.
Right.
Where's Bach and Beethoven and Mozart?
But I think that sort of proves my point that when it's when content is presented detached from the source, and it becomes hollow, and you don't understand how to relate to it. It's not taught to you how to properly put it into historical context, and that's why it was so boring and uninteresting. And once you understand the meaning, then and it completely changes the whole picture.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, we've experienced change in for over the past, I don't know, century maybe, of decline in public interest in classical music. And especially, I think 2008, I remember hearing, or maybe it was earlier than that, that hearing there was that was a real time when a lot of orchestras just went under. And it was,
10% of all professional American orchestras, opera companies. I was in an opera company that went bankrupt exactly then, so I know
yeah.
exactly well.
And and so there was a attempt to try to recapture an audience, and it was done through okay, we're going to do pre-concert lectures. I remember going to one in particular for a major orchestra that was visiting here in New York, and just feeling like this guy is talking to me like I'm an idiot. I mean, this may not be the best way to engage an audience. Like, you have a lot of there's maybe it's actually something to do with the music and the way the music is presented. And I agree with Arman that it can be really empty. It can be really devoid when its meaning is separated from from the music. Then what is it? Like, music has to mean something. And
But also, like to add to that, the fact that my colleagues, professional musicians, don't really understand aesthetics, and actually, we didn't have that subject in conservatories. And once I started reading on that, everything starts making sense, because it becomes clear that we are taught complete I don't know, mockery of what it's supposed to mean. We don't understand the function of music, how it really is very similar to a belief system, because uh, it it's not an expression of emotion, because most people just think that it's just one function, and it's sad, it's happy, it's this, it's supposed to entertain. I had a lot of arguments with my colleagues that no, music is not entertainment, it's it's a higher plane of being. So in terms of where music stands, and especially Western music, I guess now we have to categorize it as classical Western uh, music. Um, the function of it is basically purification of the soul. Like, I'm not afraid to say that, because it's um, that's one that's one part of it, and every category that you think that music fulfills, it is very close to absolutes of religion. So um, I think somehow we need to figure out how to present it, to how do you call it, to reestablish the actual meaning of music, and make the public aware, and professionals aware that we need to reinsert the actual meaning, and I think that way people will reconnect.
Now, Heather, you grew up in a religious household, I believe. I did too. I grew up in a Christian household, and I've been involved in music making kind of half. I've been a religious music. I still involved with religious music making, not mostly during the summer. That's where Arman and I've worked together a few times on Ocean Grove, where I'm music director, and I'm just But I always feel like, even in my concert life, I it's like conducting to me is like the channeling of I got to channel the energy of the composer, put that absorb it as much as I can, and then pass that on. I feel like that is sacred to me. It's that kind of. Did you find the spiritual music in your music making?
well, that's a really interesting question, because it's something I struggled with for most of my life until, kind of recently. Growing up in the church that I did, it was a very fundamental Christian church, and my dad was one of the pastors. He was an assistant pastor, and when you are a pastor's daughter, you and growing up in the church, that you're under this scrutiny that everyone else isn't under. And it was because my sisters and my mother was so strict about our violin lessons, and we also all played piano, my sisters and I. So we had a lot to practice every day, and we would have, you know, our youth symphony on Wednesday nights, and so it prohibited us from participating in a lot of events at church, and that we were criticized for that. And my mother kind of stood her ground, like, I don't care if they can't go to prayer meeting or whatever, they're going to go to youth Racine Symphony. And so I had a lot of struggle with trying to resolve me as a musician with me as a Christian, because to me they seemed in conflict. And I remember when I went to Indiana University, it was so wonderful to be around other musicians who were as serious as I was, because I didn't experience that. I didn't have friends who were. And I remember going to a Joseph Gingold masterclass, and I loved it. I hung on every word he said, and I loved every minute of it. And I just remember feeling like, how is it okay that I love this, and that I love this more than like maybe going to a church activity? And that was always like this conflict for me, until I came to New York, and then I met other Christian musicians here in New York, and then I started to kind of resolve some of these things. One of the things that when Arman was talking about Crescendo, this organization that has been established in the United States, in North America, actually Crescendo North America it's called now, and here specifically in New York City, as we have a group here, is we had a chamber music project, where we had 3 ensembles that were predetermined. We had 11 weeks, and we were paid a stipend to be able to do this. And we met once a week, and we were able to study a piece in depth, one piece that we performed in a concert with the other ensembles at Lincoln Center last summer. But each week we would take a topic that was of interest to the people in the spiritual topic, and we would discuss it, and we would apply it to these Christian principles to the music that we were studying. For example, one of the things that stood out to me was one week we talked about rest. God rested from work, whatever you believe, in the creation story of the Bible. He worked for 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. And there's rest that we can have in the Lord, that the Bible talks a lot about resting in the Lord, waiting patiently for him. There's rest that we have from our instruments, that we need to take a break from them. There's also rests in music. And with each one of these things, the rest needs to have a character quality, and dimensions, and some sort. So the rest that we have in the piece that I'm working on actually has characteristics, and just like the rest that I take from my violin, just like the rest that I need to have in Lord. And I found a common thread with all of that. So just as an example, that's one of the things we talked about.
It's amazing how, I think, of course, some composers were incredibly religious people. And I look at, of course, just who better than Bach, who is Soli Deo Gloria on almost every piece of every major work of his. And you just think that here's a man who saw himself mostly as a servant. He even said things like, he goes, if people work as hard as I do, they'll be able to, through the Lord, achieve the works I've achieved. Of course, we all kind of laugh at that because Bach. But... Right. But I'm just amazed by some of these people who were, their faith was so powerful. You look at, and part of me also looks at like the rhetoric, the degree to which rhetoric was included in music back in the Baroque. It wasn't just a superficial, I'm writing a piece about God. They were actually, he would like put the verse numbers in the score by the phrase lengths, or he would have a mordent with a certain number that would reflect the passage. I mean, it was like a puzzle sometimes. They were so much in depth into the music.
Yeah, I remember reading that Bach specifically in the Chaconne movement of the D minor partita for the solo violin, he there's a lot of stuff that he did, like code, almost mathematical things. But one of the things that he did a lot is he dealt with the Trinity. So there was a lot of groups of 3 of things, and he would spell out his name, the note in pitches, B-A-C, and then the German H, which is B flat. Is that?
Yeah.
B natural.
B natural. Sorry, B natural. And and he would do that to identify, where it became personal for him. It wasn't just the Trinity. It was the my relationship with the Trinity. What he was saying. So
I
yeah.
took a doctoral course at Rutgers, and Arman may have taken this too. I don't know if you did, but I think it was Professor Fussell would talk about this. A real wonderful composer and great teacher. Talk about the degree to which rhetoric was so influential back then, and I think that of course, some of it goes on, but it was so important to the Baroque composers.
Yeah, I did not take that class, unfortunately, but um, it was actually at Rutgers that I got interested in philosophy. So, um, that impulse was given to me when I went back to school. But talking about concepts and how they stay and perpetuate the meaning. Um, and the further we go, the less clear it becomes, the harder it is to relate for us. Um, but there is something instinctual, and again, Heather introduced me to C.S. Lewis, and that also sort of opened a certain uh, concepts to me that made certain things clearer. Not, I mean, it's impossible to know actually the origins of the universe, etc., etc. But going through life, we want to know exactly why, what it means, etc., etc. And with music, for instance, um, when I first time heard Bruckner, uh, I mean, to me, it was immediate um, clue that this is God's music. Like he was talking to God. And what was really interesting is that I did not know anything about his background. So just with the aesthetics of the sound and the way um, I guess you can hear dedication or uplift or whatever the qualities are. It, it's just what I was talking about earlier. There is definitely, a parallel path with intrinsic values of music and religious beliefs. So it's very interesting. Once you start understanding it, then again, profane becomes unacceptable. Then, of course, there is a function of entertaining music. I would not reject it. But I so to clarify, I'm talking about high value, music that actually is absolute, or pure. You
What
know,
was the Bruckner piece you heard? Like, what do you remember what it was? Which one?
I had a friend, well, an ex, and he was a audiophile. Uh, and he knew all the best recordings, best conductors, and I asked him to make copies for me, and he actually made a copy of Symphony Number 8.
Right. Yeah. I
Yeah,
that's
and the slow movement is just incredible.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
interesting how the idea of music and the sacred goes to there isn't a culture that doesn't have music, whether it's the Inuits and in the Arctic Circle, or whether it's in Africa. But yeah, there isn't a culture anywhere, I don't think, that you can think of that doesn't have music as part of their religious cultural identification.
yeah, but it's different with the West. Like the West takes everything and then it crystallizes to, and I think also it's instinctual to crystallize it to the form that is again close to an absolute. That striving to upwards is uh, again, like I don't know. That's my presupposition that it sort of stems from a Christian belief that there are absolutes and we are going into that sphere.
we were talking about the 2008 economic collapse, 2008, 2009, and what most major orchestras seem to have done is they've embraced art of the pops music, right? Pops programming has become huge on everyone's roster. Harry Potter and the movies with the New York Philharmonic. I mean, I see that that type of programming is so much more prevalent now. I think that was one of the directions we decided to go. What do you two think about that?
Well, I think it's
not Harry Potter, but I'm just thinking pops.
It's a fallacy. It's some business executives were consulted, or whoever, and they think that diluting the most important, beautiful function of classical music will connect with an audience. No, I mean, like, if you actually a rigorous thinker, you can understand that by diluting perfect product, you don't appeal to people, the consumer. Like, I don't want to call them consumers, because again, the value point of music, the selling point of music should be the uplift, the absolute of the representative of the human soul. I mean, like, whatever it is, like you were talking about Bach, the person dedicates that particular composition, or every composition, to a higher being. You can call it God, you can call it whoever, creator, but that alone already determines the upward trajectory, right? So, I mean, again, like, once people start understanding that, it's going to be easy to find meaning in what we're doing. Otherwise, it just becomes just idiotic.
I did enjoy playing the soundtrack to Psycho. That was fun.
It's very Penderecki, right? I really enjoy the pops concerts for what they are. I mean, it's and sometimes I bring, like, I teach students at my university. I teach them, like, a survey course, and sometimes I can teach if you like, let's say you like movie scores. It's not a long. There's Debussy. There's Philip Glass. There's they can actually hear the greats. They can hear some Beethoven. They can what the Hollywood composers do is adapt the great musical traditions, and they kind of make them into a product that can be used in the filming. But I think it's very different. The
Harry Potter is actually quite fun. It's very difficult to play.
Yeah, they're hard. They're not easy to play. I mean, the thing is, if it is an introduction to someone who would never darken the door of an orchestra concert otherwise, then I guess that serves that purpose. But yeah, it can't end there. Like, it has to be.
No, please. When I see my colleagues at the New York Philharmonic playing, like, Harry Potter and, like, along with the movie, they probably love it, but it just kind of makes me, in a way, it makes me sad. They could be doing Brahms.
Right. So this person I mentioned before, the person who's in charge of Crescendo North America, this organization that we've been establishing here for the last 2 years now, there's a man who's in charge of it. His name is David Geyer, and he's a conductor who I've known for many years. And he is now currently the conductor of South Dakota Symphony in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And what he has done is taken there's a issue between the Lakota people, the natives, and white people. Like, if there's any ethnic discrimination, it's against Lakota. It's not as much African American versus white as it is the Lakota people against the white. So he has projects that incorporate the Lakota tribes and orchestra, and he's just done incredible work there. But I remember him telling me that he was so happy that their Mahler concert outsold their Pops concert last season, and that was a milestone for the orchestra.
Cause for rejoicing. I would agree with him there. So thank you, David. Maestro Geyer. I think that's great. Now, Heather, in your recent studies into the brand new field of neuroscience for you, getting involved with this and studying the brain, has that affected the way you process music and the faith in music?
Probably probably more than I am all completely aware, because of course, I think differently now than I did before about certain things. I've always been aware that acoustic music, the acoustic sound has a physical effect on whoever is listening, and I believe that more than ever, and there's no denying that that's the case. What it has, what's interesting to me, of course, is the brain and how the brain actually processes music. So one of the things that there are a lot of let's see, there are a lot of, so going back to school and doing my doctorate after many years of not being in school, and memory was an issue for me. So thinking about how to memorize music was very different than when I did my first my first years in school, where I just played it over and over again until I had it from memory. But coming from a much more I had to approach it very differently in order to memorize, because I just felt I couldn't memorize anymore. And I guess that kind of led me to how I think about music and how I conceive of it. And basically, I realized that you can't, if I took a phrase of music, I couldn't really remember it. I couldn't until I internalized it. And I internalized it because I had to have some sort of response to it. I had to have, it wasn't always an emotional response, but some kind of response to the phrase that I was playing. And what I understand, okay, so that's one thing. I can answer it better, your question better.
Please. This is the most incredibly challenging topics. These are like massive philosophical underpinnings.
Right. I never really thought about all the ways in which neuroscience affects my violin playing. But one thing I will say, and this is it. So in the way the brain works, it works with networks. It's not like this region is activated now and this one isn't. Your brain is always doing stuff. It's all connected, and it's connected. This region is connected to this region through millions and billions of white matter tracks that go through the white matter of your brain. And some of the networks are actually recognized. One of them is called the default mode network. And what it is a network that is activated when you're thinking about memories, or when you're thinking about mostly memories, thinking about like kind of contemplating things. And there's another network that is task oriented. And though these two networks actually function in opposition to each other. So when one is turned on, the other one shuts off. When the other one is turned on, the other one shuts off. So in other words, when you are doing a task, you aren't really that contemplative, sort of self-analytical, thinking about memories, all of that kind of stuff really gets shut off. So what that tells me is that I need to spend time if I want to be creative, and which creativity comes out of this default mode network, I think. If I want to be creative, I have to stop doing stuff and just give myself time to be able to just reflect. And if I'm obsessing about something, the best cure for it is to just start doing something, a task. So in practicing, I really believe that I tend to just want to work all the time and not take enough time to just spend just sitting and contemplating something. So I try to do that every day. I set a timer and I do that for 10 minutes. 10 minutes isn't very much, but
in our crazy busy lives, 10 minutes means a lot. I'm the same way. I love to walk outside, and you read about Beethoven walking with his journal and just kind of getting into nature, just being part of nature and just kind of letting it tune out. And that would give him the motivation to get back to it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a fascinating conversation. I mean, I love the stories, the brain stories, like when people at the end stages of Alzheimer's, they can't remember their name or basic things, but they can remember music they hear, when they hear like jazz swing from when they were kids, and they would all of a sudden they'd sing the lyrics. I mean, the fact that the brain holds the music in so many different parts of it is just fascinating to me.
Yeah. Well, I think that, this idea that music is in the right is in the right part of your brain. It's not really true. I mean, it's all over your. There are many different. Let's just what you just said. It's not very understood anyway. But I can tell you that my son. So my son who has epilepsy, he's had two brain surgeries. The first one was when he was 10, and up to that point, he had been taking violin lessons. He'd been taking like Suzuki violin lessons, and he was working on some piece. And when he about 6 weeks before his surgery, he fell and broke his collarbone, and so he was unable to play, for a while. So 6 weeks before his whatever that last Suzuki song he was playing was the last thing. 6 weeks went by. He had his brain surgery. After his surgery, I was telling Jason knew this before we started this program. He was able to recognize 2 letters of the alphabet. He had to relearn everything: how to read, how to tie his shoes, how to button his shirt. But he could play that song just as if he had played it the day before. It was amazing.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, here's a thought actually, and it might be a valid one because, we sometimes discuss nonverbal ways of communication with Heather because she had to take a class on language, and I read up on language also. But music is basically, again, it's a non-material way of communicating, but it's a wave, but it does not signify anything. So with verbal communication, it has to be coded. So for the brain to decode, it takes more energy. And with the music, it's just there. It's like you're not spending energy today. It just goes and gets absorbed. So that's my theory.
Well, you have to check it out.
So tell us more about Crescendo, this organization Crescendo. And now, Heather, you're the head of this in the New York chapter.
We call them hubs.
New York hub. I love this idea. I was not familiar with this. I know Arman brought this to my attention, and I was very fascinated because, I work in religious music, and I'm just fascinated by people that come together. And I think we all need ways to connect, to connect with people who feel the spirituality. I think that's very important.
Well, so just to clarify, it's not sacred music necessarily. It's what Crescendo is it's
like LinkedIn for people of faith,
for Christian musicians, and for not even necessarily Christian musicians, but someone who's interested in it or interested in finding out about it. My goal as I was telling you, Crescendo looks different in different cities because the needs are different wherever you are geographically in this country, and in Canada. But here in New York, my goal for Crescendo is that it meets the needs of professional musicians. And sometimes those needs are emotional, sometimes they're spiritual, sometimes they're physical, material. So because it's a tough life. Like, you devote your entire life to studying this occupation that is monetarily not valued in the society. And it's hard. Like, I just remember teaching wealthy students over on the East Side, and I would, during the weeks of spring break, for 2 weeks, not only would I lose all my income because none of them would, because they'd all go off on these incredible vacations, and I couldn't afford to go on vacation, and I'd lose all my income for 2 weeks, and I'd think, I'm just as smart as these people. Why am I? But it's the life of a musician. Yeah. So
we look at our models, and so some of the musicians did okay, but like Mozart, you look at their. I love to read the letters and the biographies, and I'm just fascinated. Like, Mozart died very poor. He's back and forth. He was able to make his bills, but just barely. And it's the struggle is real.
Yeah, Mahler never earned a living as a composer in his whole life. No one even cared about his music. He just earned his living as a conductor.
You know who was the first musician that commodified his art? It was actually Ludwig van Beethoven. he's the first one who actually had
Freelance composer,
the
right?
publisher. Yeah, he had a long-term contract. He was very savvy, and there's a philosopher by the name Theodore Adorno, and that's where I read that he sort of pointed it out that the one who the little capitalist, it was Ludwig. Yeah.
One of the so I mentioned this project we had last year. Well, we have what we've been doing since October is meeting in my home, and anyone's welcome. And we meet once a month and
You should come.
eat. Yeah,
I
and
will. That's
I make
fascinating.
I make dinner for everyone afterwards, and
Done. No.
and what we've been doing is each month we've been taking a different element of worship. One of the things that I was in Hungary last summer for the Crescendo Summer Institute, and one of the things that it occurred to me that there's a lot of discussion about worship music and worship, and I remember thinking, what am I supposed to do? Like, what is, if I'm okay, I'm told to worship God. We go to church to worship. There are these elements of worship, but what are we actually doing when we worship? What is my mind like? What am I gonna say? Okay, I'm gonna tell God He's great, and that's worship. Like, it's got to be more than that, and it's got to be more than an acronym. Like, I'm gonna confess. I'm gonna, like, give thanks. So I thought about, like, well, what are the things that I know that are part of worship from the scriptures? And so I came up with a list of 7 of them. And we started with a lament. And then we went, and so lament, and then in November was giving thanks. In December was adoration. January was petition, asking God for things. And then this month we're going to talk about praise. And then we have sacrifice or offering and communion. And so there's seven months that this takes place. And so right now I'm working to raise money to commission a composer to write a piece for us here in New York, all the musicians. I'm thinking of 25 member chamber orchestra, and this piece will have 7 movements, and each movement will be an element of worship, a musical portrayal of it. And then this piece, then the goal is then that this piece will kind of tour the hub cities of the United States and Canada, and any city can take it on. I have a composer who's agreed to do this. He's amazing. His name is Cameron Ince. He's a Turkish American composer, and he has agreed to write it in a way that can be easily adaptable to different orchestras. So that has been really, I've loved doing this, because what we do in the evenings here in my home is that I ask everybody who comes to either bring a piece that they're performing or a recording of something that they feel for them reflects this element of worship in some way. So there's playing, and then there's a little bit of discussion or scripture read, and then playing. So it's mostly playing music, and then we a little bit of discussion, not too much, and then we eat dinner together.
What a great way for musicians to come and bond over this idea. And the composition sounds fantastic, and it sounds exciting.
Yeah. Well, and then this next month is praise, and I was speaking to a violinist last week, and she's told me that she wants to learn the Tali Chacon, which is very somber. It's very kind of heart-wrenching, minor piece of music, and I said, well, you should play it. She said she needed a place to play it. I said, well, you should play it at the next Crescendo gathering on February 21st. And she said, well, but it's praise. That doesn't feel like praise. And I said, yeah, but praise, we're told to praise God through our tears, through our pain, praise probably is the most misunderstood element of worship. It's certainly not all, people think of it as like praise choruses and we're all really happy and joyful, but it isn't always that way. Probably rarely that way.
Right. That kind of prepackaged kind of say Hollywood, but it's certainly commercialized version of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a way of really of kind of making worship more multidimensional and better understood. And I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface. There's probably so much more to.
I've had this conversation often with, having a large church ministry, and at the helm of that, and the music department of it, it's like, contemporary worship, traditional worship, which includes a lot of classical versus, choir versus praise band. And, I think they resonate with different people, but I know for musicians like myself, the contemporary can get really stale with like 3 chords and the 11 times our God is great, God is great, God is great. Yeah, I don't get a lot out of that. So I'm always looking for the deeper connection too.
Yeah. Well, I think that we all, and a lot of churches are closing their doors to classical musicians, sadly. And so I'm hoping Crescendo can be a home for us, for classical musicians who.
Well, I actually suggested that to Heather. I think the only way for the West to survive is to go back to the roots and to find ways to create that initial sense of meaning through reconnecting with the basic things, how the West went into dominating basically the world. So basically, there is power in going back to the roots and re-energizing through that, and the arts and music were essential to churches and all that expression of uh, praise and whatever, awe and dedication. Like all this superlatives, beauty, serenity. Like whatever it meant to be in the state of worship. And I think the arts expressed it exceptionally well. So there there must be the way to start this movement, and I'm only an agnostic, and I'm trying to conceptualize this.
Well, it's fascinating that Arman, you're obviously a very deep thinker, and your mind's always thinking. I think it's very fascinating that you've delved into this and you continue to delve into this, and I think it's exciting to see where it takes you.
Well, absolutely, because I've been in a dark place because after being an atheist, it's very difficult to find meaning because when you don't believe in anything, it's just like what do you do? It's you can indulge in every kind of vice there is, but then also that becomes boring after a while. So you can get family and kids and our profession. I mean, those categories are not. It's just not enough to feel fulfilled. So there is something to be said about absolutes. It's like
Well,
if you and in everything, you know.
I appreciate this conversation with both of you. Where can people go to find out more about both of you and also Crescendo?
Well, I don't know where they can find about me, but or if they want to, but Crescendo. Well, I can. Can I leave my email address and please email if
I will
you're.
put the Crescendo. Actually, this is perfect. The Crescendo page I have has both of your bios and all the information on it as well.
Okay, so my actual email is what I use to communicate with people about Crescendo and about our meetings. And as I said, all are welcome. We're hoping to build a core group of people here. We have some. It's hard for people to get out, and especially I think after COVID, people are got used to staying home, and so it's really hard to actually go somewhere. But
Netflix has taken the role of a lot of concerts and live stream. People, my thing is I don't want people watching the Zoom screens to think that that's live performance. It's like, no.
Right, I know. But then when you do make the effort and do connect with people in person, it's always such a wonderful evening. So yeah, please email me if you're interested, and I can add you to the list. And that, what else?
Well, I'm currently working on creating this new introduction to the view of classical music. So, and I actually pitched to several important people that could push it further. But that's going to be my next project, to reintroduce the basics and in aesthetics of arts and music. It's going to be a fun thing.
Well, continued success to both of you, and continued exploration of the spirit, of the mind, of the heart. And I think that, and especially the mind and the research into the mind. I think this is all fantastic and a really awesome conversation. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks for
Jason.
having
That
us.
was a privilege to talk to you.
All the best. Thank you for joining us on Music Matters with Jason Tramm. Please remember to subscribe on YouTube, and check us out on our social media platforms. To see our over 250 past episodes, check out our website at www.jasontram.net. Remember, keep music alive. Good night.